Okay, are you ready to dive into some seriously groundbreaking science? Because today we are tackling Darwin and his theory of evolution. I know what you're thinking, Darwin, like, isn't that a bit much? But trust me, we're going to break it all down. It's like we're going on an expedition through this huge jungle of ideas, and we're here to guide you to the coolest stuff.
I like that. Darwin's On the Origin of Species, which came out way back in 1859, really changed everything. It's like the book that totally transformed how we understand life on Earth.
And you've decided to hang out with us while we unpack it. So you're interested in evolution, but where do you even start with Darwin?
Well, Darwin himself was very careful, almost hesitant, you could say. Like, he spent more than 20 years gathering evidence before he published anything.
Really? Wow, 20 years. That's a serious commitment. Like he was building this really strong argument piece by piece.
Exactly. He knew that this wasn't just some random idea he had. It was going to shake things up in a big way. See, back then, everyone pretty much thought that species were just created independently and they never changed. But Darwin was about to flip that idea on its head.
So what was the big question that got Darwin really thinking?
It wasn't just about whether species change. That was an idea that had been around. He was really focused on how things change. Like, how do they become so well suited to where they live? He was captivated by things like, well, think of a woodpecker.
Yeah, okay, I can picture it. Like that beak, the tongue. It's like they were designed to get bugs out of trees.
Exactly. Or take mistletoe, this plant that can steal nutrients from trees. It relies on birds to spread its seeds. It even tricks insects into helping it reproduce. These kinds of things just fascinated him, and he wanted to understand how these crazy adaptations happen.
It really makes you think there's so much in nature we just take for granted.
I know, right? And that's what Darwin did. He started with this concept of variation, which is essentially all the little differences between individuals within a species.
Okay, so like not all woodpeckers are exactly the same, not all mistletoe are identical, got it. But how does that explain those really incredible adaptations?
Well, he found a way to make variation relatable. Like, think about dog breeds. You've got Chihuahuas all the way up to Great Danes, but they all came from wolves.
It's crazy when you think about it like that. We've created this huge diversity just through breeding.
For sure.
Yeah.
And Darwin used these examples to show that variation is everywhere. He even found it in something as ordinary as gooseberries. He wrote about all these different types of gooseberries that people had bred with different sizes and colors and flavors.
So we've seen how humans can kind of direct those changes through breeding,
Mm-hmm.
but Darwin realized something even more amazing was going on in the wild, right? Something that could explain those woodpeckers and that mistletoe.
You got it. And that is where natural selection comes in. Like, it's nature's way of shaping life over time.
Okay, this is starting to make a lot more sense.
Yeah.
So we've got all these variations, but how does nature decide which ones are better? Like what makes one trait better than another? So like nature's running this giant experiment, always testing out new variations.
Exactly. And the really cool part is that Darwin realized the environment itself plays a huge role in deciding which variations are actually helpful. Like, the environment sets the rules.
Okay, so like a jungle.
Mm-hmm.
All those plants competing for light, right? The ones that grow taller have bigger leaves. They're going to get more sun.
Yeah. And the ones that do well, they reproduce and pass on those good traits. It's like this giant feedback loop. But instead of likes and comments, it's survival and reproduction. Darwin called it the struggle for existence.
So not always pretty out there. Kind of like rush hour, but for plants and animals. Only the fittest survive, right?
Yeah, that's the idea. But remember, fittest doesn't have to mean the strongest or fastest. It's all about being the best fit for where you live. A delicate orchid in the rainforest wouldn't make it in the desert, but that doesn't mean it's not fit for the rainforest. That's a really important point from Darwin.
So not strongest, but best fit for your environment. That's key. But hold on, if these helpful variations are so important, how come they're not everywhere?
Oh, that's where the numbers game comes in. Imagine a forest floor covered in little seedlings. Only a tiny, tiny fraction are going to become trees. They're all competing for resources like sunlight, water, nutrients.
Okay, I see where you're going with this.
It's the same for any species. The ones that are lucky enough to have variations that give them an edge. Maybe they're better at finding food. Maybe they can attract a mate. Or maybe they're good at avoiding predators. They're the ones that survive, reproduce, and pass those traits down. It's like having a bigger gene pool is like having more lottery tickets. More variety means a better chance of hitting the jackpot and getting a beneficial adaptation.
This is blowing my mind. It's like he cracked the code or something. But you know what gets me? Darwin figured all this out without the stuff we have today. No gene sequencing, no fancy microscopes. How'd he do it?
That's what's so amazing. He was just an incredible observer. He studied nature so carefully, comparing species, analyzing fossils, observing variation within populations.
Speaking of observing variation, just the other day I was watching birds at my feeder, and I noticed all these different shades of brown in the sparrows. Like some were lighter, some darker, some had different markings. Could those little differences actually be important for their survival?
Definitely. Even those little variations could be because of natural selection. Maybe those different shades of brown help them camouflage, or maybe it's related to attracting a mate. Darwin would have loved those sparrows at your feeder.
This is what I love about Darwin. It makes you see the world in a whole new way. Like every plant, every animal, it all has this story about how it got to be the way it is. But where does it all lead? Why does Darwin still matter today, like almost 170 years after his book?
That is the million-dollar question. And that's what we're going to look at as we continue to explore Darwin's work.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. Darwin's ideas were revolutionary back then, and they're still so relevant today. Like, he gave us this whole new way to see the world, this deep understanding of how life has been shaped by these forces of variation, competition, and natural selection.
It's true. Darwin's work is foundational to so many fields, like biodiversity and conservation. Evolution helps us see that every species, even like the tiniest insect, it all matters. They all play this vital role.
So instead of just appreciating the beauty of it all, we start to understand the processes behind it all.
Yeah, we realize how connected everything is, how protecting biodiversity isn't just about like saving cute animals.
Mm.
It's about saving these systems that make life on Earth possible.
We're all connected, kind of like this big evolutionary tapestry.
Exactly. And think about medicine. That's another field where Darwin's ideas are huge. Antibiotic resistance, that's evolution happening right now. Bacteria are evolving. The ones that are resistant survive and reproduce and pass that resistance down.
It's scary. Evolution isn't just this thing in textbooks. It's real, and it affects us every day.
It definitely does. But let's think about something more positive like artificial selection. We've been using it for a long time to breed plants and animals. I mean, we went from wolves to pugs and from grass to
So
corn.
now we have gene editing. It's like a whole new level.
Right. We can manipulate genes, cure diseases, create crops that can survive anything. It's like we're in the driver's seat of evolution.
So whether it's fighting antibiotic resistance or creating new crops, we're using Darwin's principles all the time. Wild.
It really is. And that's exactly why understanding Darwin is so important. It's not just about memorizing stuff. It's about having this framework to understand the world, the past, present, even the future.
It makes you wonder, if Darwin was here right now, today, what would he think? Everything's changing so fast with technology. He'd probably flip out about AI and gene editing and just how much information we have at our fingertips.
Yeah, what do you think would be the most fascinating thing to him?
Well, we always hear about evolution as this slow process, but today things are moving so fast, especially with all the technology. I think Darwin would be floored by artificial intelligence, gene editing, all that stuff, and just having so much information so easily available.
You're totally right. Imagine what he'd think about whether all this technology is actually changing evolution. It's something scientists are thinking about today. It'd be great to get Darwin's take on it.
I also think he'd be really worried about climate change and all the problems we're having with the environment.
Oh, absolutely. He spent his whole life understanding how interconnected life is, that balance in ecosystems,
Hmm.
seeing how we're messing that up and how some species are really struggling. It would be tough.
That's like we're running this big experiment, but the planet is at stake.
Yeah, it is. But Darwin was so curious and dedicated to science. I don't think he would just give up. He'd be in the lab, out in the field, pushing us to study and understand everything and find solutions.
That's a good point. Even with all these big challenges, that spirit of discovery, that drive to learn, it can help us.
And that's what makes Darwin's work so important. It's not just the answers he found, but the questions he asked. Questions that we're still asking today. And that make us want to explore and learn and never stop being amazed by the natural world.
That's what I hope people listening will take away from this. To never stop being curious, to see the world in new ways. So as you go about your day, think about this. If Darwin was here with you, what questions would you ask him? What would you want to learn from him? Keep those questions alive, and we'll see you next time.